What is up, everybody? I am Joe DeHoyos. I'm the host of Beyond the Woodline. Real quick before we get started, some things I always like to talk about before we start talking to our guest. For those of you who don't know, I am the executive director of the JRG, which is the Jamming Research Group. It's a Bigfoot group. We try to help out as many people as we can, whether it's with investigation or sometimes people have trouble with these creatures on their land and they just want some help. So if you're in, we have teams in Washington, Oregon, West Virginia, Maryland, Ohio, Michigan, Tennessee, New York State, Minnesota, and Texas. Of course, that's where I'm at. And if you're interested in joining the team, man, let me know. We'd be happy to have you guys on. Uh, you don't have to get out into the field to participate. You can do it from behind your computer, from your cell phone. Just research places for us, maybe find places where they have history of Bigfoot sightings, things like that. You can help out in many, many different ways. Just get a hold of me at beyond.woodline@gmail.com and I'll be happy to talk to you guys. And with all that being said, I have with me tonight my guest, Gwendolyn. How you doing, Gwendolyn?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great. You like to be called Gwen or Gwendolyn, or does it matter?
Gwendolyn, preferably, yes.
Okay. All right. Cool, cool. Yeah, because, people grow up, right? And they're like Becky don't like to be called Becky no more. They want to be called Rebecca.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, man. So thanks a lot for doing the show. I really appreciate it. If you don't mind, real quick, just give us a little bit of background on yourself and what got you into this crazy field that we're involved in.
Honestly, I've always been interested in mysterious things and places. So I grew up a lot watching the TV shows. Um, but then I had what I call a paranormal awakening when I was 12 years old.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And that just kind of blew up, and I started researching a lot of the paranormal. And I was always still interested in Bigfoot and cryptids and other things like that. But most of my research with that was, armchair research, just out of pure interest. But then my interest grew and I started going out and looking for these things, mostly Bigfoot. And then I had my first Bigfoot experience, and I was hooked after that. I just couldn't get away from it.
Mhm. So what happened on your first Bigfoot experience? What was that like?
That was actually featured on the Travel Channel's Terror in the Woods.
Mhm. Okay.
And um, my experience was insane. I didn't actually see a Bigfoot myself, but we were encircled and they were almost corralling us out of the woods and off the mountain.
Okay.
And we were surrounded by probably about six or seven of them. Initially, I went out there with another investigator, which was something I was new to doing as well, was teaming up with other investigators. This was, my first of a few team ups with other researchers. And we went out there to take a group of college students to look for signs of Bigfoot. Well, this research area was supposed to be quiet at the time. They were supposed to have moved out of the area and they weren't there anymore. So we were kind of just looking for older evidence, like broken branches, tree structures, things like that, things that could stick around that we could show them, like this could be signs of Bigfoot.
Right.
And then they ended up having to leave. They had a college party to go to. They were all college students. So me, the other investigator, and a friend of his continued on up the mountain after they had left. And when we got to the outcropping, we were there watching the view. It was a gorgeous view. And I was paying attention to the sun going down. And I was like, guys, we got to get back in the woods. It's going to get darker in there faster and it's going to get dark out here. So we need to get in there before the sun sets. So we started scrambling around trying to find flashlights. We finally found a few flashlights. They weren't great. And we started coming down this mountain. And the way down was very scary because at that point, dew had already started to settle on the rocks
Mhm.
and it was real slippery. We were taking the way down that wasn't a trail. It was just a kind of like a rock slope. So we were sliding on these rocks, getting down, and then there was crevices that went down 150 feet that you had to watch out for that you could fall into. So the way down itself was very nerve-wracking. However, as we were coming down, we started hearing something behind us sliding across the rocks as we were moving down the rock face. And, we all stopped and we listened, and then we heard one little tiny slide. And I was like, yeah, there's definitely something up there. I'm thinking it's probably something at the top of the ridge, just, moving around, probably deer or something. But as we came down further and further, we just kept hearing it sliding down behind us. It was almost like it was sliding on its butt behind us.
Oh, yeah.
And then we got down onto solid ground and we started looking around and we started hearing things. So then we kept moving down. We was like, the gentleman I was with, the other investigator, said, we need to get on flatter ground just in case anything happens. That way we can, plan some sort of emergency route out of here. So I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. So we headed on down further till we got to flat-ish ground. And we were on a trail at that point. It was dark. There was nobody else there. And that's when all the activity happened. Initially, we were hearing the footsteps around us. And again, I'm still thinking deer or anything like that. But the steps were very hard and I wasn't sure what the deal was. So I was trying to keep my mind open. But again, the skeptical side of me is just trying to downplay everything at the same time. And then the gentleman, the other investigator, his name's Mike, he decides he's going to do a wood knock. So he does that and nothing. And so he says, I'm going to try a whoop. So he tries that, nothing. And he looks at me and he goes, why don't you try a really girly whoop? And I'm thinking, I don't know what a girly whoop sounds like, but okay, sure, I'll try it. So I did my best effort at a girly whoop and we got a response. And in my head, I'm thinking, this can't be real. This is not really happening. This is not real. This isn't legit. This creature can't exist. And I'm still trying to downplay it in my head. Well, it was followed by some rocks being thrown. And then the footsteps got in closer. And then at one point I drew like a sigil on the ground. And I had multiple goals there. My efforts were to see if it was supernatural based. So a sigil is basically a creation, a circular creation. It's supposed to be a magical creation
Right.
that has a job. So every sigil has a different job, and it's whatever you give it. And there's intention and everything else behind it. So my sigil was to draw anything paranormal in that was there, or if it was a Bigfoot and it was a paranormal, maybe to draw that curiosity. So I started drawing this sigil on the ground, and as I'm drawing it, it has directional lines. And as you pull in, I'm using a stick on the ground. And as I'm pulling the stick in, creating these directional lines, everywhere I create one of those directional lines, we hear footsteps. And I'm like, okay, so something is definitely going on, but what is it?
Mm-hmm.
So the guy, the other investigator's friend that was there with us, he starts having severe anxiety from the whole situation. He starts getting white and clammy with cold sweats, and Mike starts saying, he's going to have a heart attack. He's going to have a heart attack right here on this mountain, and we're not going to be able to get him out. He's like, we got to go. And I was like, no, we can't go. We're actually getting stuff. We're getting housed. We're getting rocks being thrown at us. We're getting these footsteps all around us. And we had noticed we were starting to be surrounded. And that's when Kenny, the guest that we had there, started having severe anxiety, was because, okay, we're getting surrounded now. And so eventually, Mike, the investigator, he grabs my arm, not in any kind of aggressive way, just to kind of like, hey, snap me out of it. Stop trying to antagonize these things and let's go. So he grabs my arm, and as he goes to pull me, because I'm like, I'm in my circle. You take him down the hill. I'll be fine right here. I'm safe in my circle. I'll be here when you get back. And he's like, I'm not leaving you. So that's when he reached out and grabs my arm. And he goes to like lightly tug me out of my circle. And then all of a sudden, whatever was up the trail that everybody knew was there, it just charges us. And all you hear is this boom, 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 boom. And it was so hard, it shook the ground that we were standing on. And we had these little dim flashlights. We can't see anything that's surrounding us because they're so dim. They're not working very well. And we hold up our flashlights, and I'm just thinking, what if I'm between them, between the guys and this thing? What am I going to see when this thing comes out into this light? That's the first thing I was thinking. Like, when the footsteps stop, what am I going to see? And so finally the footsteps stop, and it stops just outside the flashlight range. And I'm like, and I'm sorry. And I'm ducked down. And my first instinct is to duck down and in a defensive posture. And as soon as I do that, the footsteps stop just outside our flashlight range. And we had a YouTube video going at the time. And I'm thinking, we're catching all this. We're getting this evidence. And I look at the camera, and I just got this face like, holy crap. So then I'm like, okay, it's time to go, but we need to go slowly. Let's back out. Okay. We're not trying to intimidate this thing. Okay. So we start backing out slowly. And then we get out and we get down to solid ground. It's flat ground. Everything's good. And we're like, okay, we're safe. You know, we still have our YouTube live going, and I'm thinking we're getting all this, and we start kind of going over like what happened, and I'm like excited, and Kenny's like, I'm going to pass out. And Mike's like, I can't believe that just happened. So everybody's giving these different responses. And then all of a sudden you hear this big loud explosion, this big loud boom. And immediately my heart sank, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing is not done yet. So we're like, we're not far enough out. We need to get closer to the car because we're not even near the car yet. So then we're like, okay, let's keep going. We're going to keep going out further and further until we're good. And there's this gate, this fence line that kind of is at the end of the grassy area, and it kind of hits that parking lot area, the blacktop. It was like this weird sort of sensation. The moment we stepped through that fence line and onto the blacktop, it was like we gave them what they wanted, and all the pressure just released, you know, like it was all just gone. And I was like, okay, we're out far enough now. Everything feels good now. But as soon as we got out and I felt like everything was okay, we hear this really long whoop over the ridgeline, over this hill off to, well, it would have been the east side of the mountain. And we hear this, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And it goes on forever and ever and ever. And then it stops. And then up the next ridgeline, you hear it again, another one. And then when that one's done, you hear up again, even higher on the top of the mountain. And then it started over again, and it went up again. And then finally, after the second time of it doing that, there was just all these loud calls, just like over and over and over again. It was like it was like a war. It was like a war victory cry. It was like, they're out, you know, we're good. And I'm sitting here thinking, we're getting all this on video. Meanwhile, Mike's like, we got to go. We got to go. And I'm like, no, we're getting stuff. I was like, do you have a digital recorder? Let's get it on video and on audio too. And he goes, I left it at the hotel. I'm like, dang it. At least we're getting it on this video, this YouTube live. So Kenny, he's already beelined it to his car. He's gone. And it's just me and Mike left. We rode in the same car together. And I'm like, okay, let me get this video posted really fast. I want to stay here because this calls are still going on. And then I want to do an audio recording from my phone. So I go to hit process. And as soon as it starts to process the video to post it to YouTube, it says processing video failed. So we lost it all. And I'm like, okay, I can't close out this screen because, you know, once I close this out, that's it. I might be able to let it keep trying to process because I hit the back button and try to process again. I just kept trying to do all these different things. And eventually he's like, we got to go. You know, this is going to go on forever. They're going to keep doing this till we leave. And I'm like, you know, we're getting what we want. I can't close out the YouTube because if I do that, I'm afraid I'll lose it. So finally we just get in the car and we go. And I've got my windows down. I'm just listening to it the whole way we're pulling away. And finally, I'm like, okay, I've got to just try to just do something and figure this out. So I'm trying all these different things. And finally, it posts the video on the way home. I'm like, okay, great. It posted. So I go to open it up. We had a 57-minute video. It cut it down to 9 minutes. And the only thing that's in that 9-minute video is a couple little small howls. And that's it.
Hmm. Damn. Damn, that
Yeah.
sucks. Yeah.
It was I have never been so disappointed or felt like I wanted to cry so bad in my life. It was just I was in shock at all these electronics that I purchased and that I had and that was ready to go. It was all left behind aside from my phone. And Mike had tried to use his phone for YouTube Live already and it killed his battery. His battery just zapped.
Right.
So we was down to only my phone. Kenny took off. He left. And I was trying to process the video. So we were kind of like stuck. We had no way to record this at that point. And it was all gone. We lost it all.
Man, yeah, that would have been really, really cool evidence. Yeah, because I love audio evidence actually a lot better than anything else. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, man. So how did that guy Kenny turn out? Was he okay?
Well, he was kind of okay, I guess. Honestly, he went through some trauma about it, and he wouldn't talk about it. He never talked about it after that until we went for the TV show. And we went to go on the TV show. And we were talking. Me and Mike were talking about it, and we were like, "Yeah, that was crazy. Remember this, this, and this?" And he's like, "Yeah, that was crazy." And we were trying to talk to Kenny, and Kenny's like, "I don't want to talk about it." And we're like, "What?" And he goes, "Listen, I haven't talked about it since it happened. I only want to talk about it the one time when we go in there, and I don't want to talk about it again. I don't want to talk about it." He was that impacted by it. He was that fearful of it. It was just insanity.
Right, right. And that happens too. It seems like people will either jump into this with both feet, or they'll want nothing to do with it afterwards.
Exactly.
And I
Exactly.
talked to a few years ago, I bet closer to 4 years ago, and he told me, "I'm going to tell you this story one time, and that's it." And I said, "Okay." So he told me his story, and I've tried to contact him again because I wanted to put him on Will's show, and he never ever returned my calls or anything. And
Wow. He just doesn't want to. And some people are like that. Some people to talk about it again is to live it again.
right,
And that's accurate up to a point. After you talked about it so many times, you could talk about it with all that emotional side effect. Like my reaction when I talk about it is excitement, because that's what I felt in the moment, was just this utter excitement. But his was fear. So when he talks about it, it brings all that fear back.
Okay. So what did that do to you as far as going back into the woods or to the mountains? Did you have any kind of like any kind of second thoughts on doing that?
Yes. So I thought I was good. I thought, like, okay, I'm good. Like, this is what I want. This is what I was here for. And we decided we were going to go back again. So we went back a couple weeks later. And I mean, I was good up until we got in there and the daylight started to go away and my heart started pounding. And I'm not sure if it was just the atmosphere, but everything felt like it was being closed in on. Like the woods felt like they were closing in on you. The whole atmosphere just felt very dense and very intense. And I'm sensitive. I don't know if a lot of your viewers believe in that, but I am sensitive and I can pick up on like energies, emotions, things like that. And because of that, I can also tell where something is because I can feel where it's coming from. And the atmosphere just felt very dense and very like heavy and like it was pressing on you and like everything was closing in on you. And I was like, man, I said, Mike, it was just me and Mike at that point. I said, Mike, this just doesn't feel right. Something does not feel right. I don't like this. He says, yeah. He says, something feels pretty intense. I was like, why don't we get out of this thick patch of briar and all this stuff that we're in right now? Let's get back onto an actual trail. That way we have our way out if we need to get out. I'm not comfortable with this. So to me, that told me like it really did put a little bit of fear in me that I didn't recognize until I went back. But then as we were on our way out, it felt like they were hiding from something.
Okay.
And I told him, I was like, man, I said, I feel like there's one up there on that hill. It feels the same as it did that night because they have a different feeling, a different vibe. Like everything has its own feeling and the way it feels to me. Cats feel a certain way, dogs feel another way, people feel another way. These things felt like unlike anything I've ever felt before. And I was like, there's it feels like there's one up there, but it feels like it's hiding. And right when I said that, you heard this big stick branch. And then we went on along. And at this point, we're trying to make our way out in the darkness. At this point, it had already gotten dark, and I'm kind of like nervous. I'm feeling like they're hiding. And my first thought is, what are they hiding from?
Hmm.
So I'm like, we need to get out. And then again, a little bit further up, there's this ridge line that goes off real steep to our side. And I'm like, okay, feels something feels like it's right up here, right over the path. And as we get to that exact spot where I felt it, all of a sudden it sounds like something just rolls down the hill that's really heavy. And it was so loud it made us both jump back. And finally we made our way out. Nothing other than that happened, but I was like, man, I didn't expect myself to be that fearful. And now ever since then when I go out, especially at night, and we go cuz I like to go off trail. I like to go where people don't go,
Right.
especially when I get off trail. If I don't have a larger group with me, I am nervous. It does make me nervous now. And I'm like, anything could happen. And you're out here looking for these things that some people say are aggressive. So, like what are you doing? But I'm still out there doing it because I just have this thirst for this knowledge of these mysterious creatures that nobody has yet been able to prove.
Right. Yeah. I'm nervous still going out, and it's been a while since I've had anything that what I would call like aggressive. But it it certainly is unnerving. We've had moments where we've had stuff thrown at us, branches shaking, or like trees shaking at us, growls and howls, screams. So yeah, it's a lot scarier than what people think. And even me, like I said, I won't say even me, but I'm typically not scared of anything or anyone. But yeah, there's definitely moments out there where I do get nervous, and even in the daytime. Um, for those of you who follow along, know Walter's a good friend of mine. Where he had his encounter, it's a crazy, crazy area, and there have been a couple times where we've gone out there in the daytime, and we both just really felt like we were being watched. We had our heads on the swivel.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's scary, but it's a fun kind of scary, if that makes sense.
It's
Um,
scary in the moment, and then when you go back on it and you are able to retell it
yeah,
and relive it through your experience, read the retelling of your experience, it's exciting. It's like this really cool thing that nobody else has gotten to experience, very few people have gotten to experience happened to me. And it's really cool, but at the same time in the moment, I mean, sometimes you feel like you're fighting for your life sometimes when you start having all these crazy things happen around you.
right. Yeah. Um, and so you having these I don't know if you want to call them abilities or gifts. You said you're sensitive, right? Um, does that always go off when you're out in the woods, or just at those certain moments?
Yes, but if you could think of it as like hearing, like you can hear everything,
Right.
but you're not always listening to everything you're hearing around you. So while
Okay.
you can hear it, you actually have to acknowledge it and listen to it to remember what you heard or
Right.
to pay attention to what you heard. Like, right now there's an air conditioner going on behind me. I didn't notice it till I made that comparison of listening. Now I notice it. It's like that.
Okay.
So it's always happening around me, but it's not till like I'm like, okay, I want to hear or I want to, feel. And then I start getting that stuff.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Yeah. And yeah, I guess that's a good tool to have at your disposal. you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of want to get onto the paranormal. You said that at 12 years old, you kind of had your awakening. Um, so was that like a validation that something was out there, or was that just your introduction to the paranormal?
that was I wouldn't even call it introduction. That was my explosion into the paranormal.
Okay.
I don't remember having any experiences prior to that. None that I'm aware of that I remember. But it was after this one particular incident that I went to bed that night and I had my first precognizant dream, which is basically a dream that comes true. And after that, it was like no holds barred. I had everything going on around me. I had shadow people. I had things flying around. I had doors slamming, cupboards slamming, and we were seeing shadow people. Um, it was just like, and precognizant dreams, sensitivities to people's emotions. It was just this explosion of all this stuff that started happening all at once.
Okay. Yeah, I used to have. I used to live in a place that was like very, very active, with the paranormal, and but that wasn't until I was in my 40s, I think, when stuff started happening. Maybe just right around 40 when stuff started happening, and but that was like my first like true experiences with the paranormal. Even though I believed in it, my whole life growing up, and hearing stories from different people and uh, family members or what have you. But yeah, that was like my first time, like really, really experiencing it and seeing shadow figures, being poked in the ribs, and
Yeah.
crazy stuff like that, man. Um,
Yeah, I think some people have to start experiencing it by seeking it out. And I think other people might call it a gift, might call it a curse. It's like pushed on them. It's like shoved in their face. You're going to experience this. So that was mine. That it's like you can't ignore it. You're going to experience this. So
you know what's funny, and this was something I didn't think of until like a few weeks ago. I can't remember who I was talking to. It was one of my guests. Um, they were talking about how when you open yourself up, you actually open yourself up to a lot. And I think right at that moment, just started getting into the Bigfoot research. Um, so I was opening myself up a lot, and then that's when the paranormal stuff started happening. And then that's even when I saw like my first UFO, full on saw craft. Me and the guy I was fishing with, we saw an actual freaking craft, not just like a light in the sky or something shooting across the sky. We saw a freaking craft. So that was
wow,
yeah, and that was pretty cool. Do
that
you
is cool.
Yeah? Do you also have interest in UFO stuff and the UAPs?
I do. I do. So I've seen what I guess you could call UAVs. What are UAPs? Uh, a few times. I think like four times. Um, but I've never. Once I got done with researching this one particular case that I worked, I decided I didn't want to delve into individual cases of UFO or alien or abduction experiences. And that's because it bled into my personal life
Okay.
and it started impacting my personal life. And it got really scary for a minute. And I was just like, you know what? I'm done. I'm not talking about this anymore. And I actually talked about the gentleman on a podcast about 2 years ago for the first time. And I didn't say his name, but I talked about the whole everything that happened. And I guess I should introduce this a little better. So I was researching this gentleman who was having these abduction like experiences, and he said that they would talk to him in his head. He thought it was the government. And he said when they would talk to him in his head, it was like shocking his brain. Or if he did anything wrong, it would shock his brain. And every now and then he would stop and he'd go, "Oh, shocking my brain, shocking my brain." And that would be him saying, like, okay, I'm not doing something right. I'm doing something they don't want me to do. They're shocking my brain. And I was like, maybe it's a psychiatric issue, but I he kind of fell into my pathway. So I was like, maybe I'm meant to help him. So I started researching his case. And I started getting these weird emails. And then they started referencing my kids being in school. And so I stopped. And I was like, I'm not doing this no more. This is too scary. They're referencing my location, my kids. I don't know who's doing this to me, and I don't want to find out. So I stopped researching the case, and all that stuff just went away. Well, I talked about him about his case on a podcast about 2 years ago. And it was the weirdest thing. The next day, the person that reaches out to me is the gentleman that I was working that case on himself. And he reaches out to me on Facebook and he says, "Hi, how are you doing?" And start talking to him like, "Hey, is everything okay? It's weird that you contact me. I was just talking about you yesterday." And he goes, "Oh, you were talking about me?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, who are you?" And I was like, "You don't remember me? You just wrote me." And he goes, "No, you wrote me." And I was like, "Okay, I'm done. This is nope. I'm not doing this. It's again going to leak into my personal life." And I blocked him. And I'm like, "That's it." So that really scared me. That was one of the times where I was like, "Okay, I've went too deep."
Right.
And I just decided I blocked him on Facebook. And I was like, "Okay, he's playing games with my head now. I don't know what to think." So I just left it at that.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of creepy. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was. I had met somebody. It was over a year ago, and they were an abductee. So we got pretty close. Friendship wise. We got pretty close. And she told me, she goes, "The more I tell you, the more you're going to have stuff happen, to you." And man, she wasn't lying. I mean, immediately, just the weirdest crap. I don't want to talk about it on the air. Some weird stuff started happening, and yeah, yeah, it was just the weirdest damn thing. And so
Wow.
after we stopped talking, all that stuff, went away. But we just recently, within the last couple of weeks, started talking again, but keeping it very, very on the low. And I'm not
Yeah.
with that anymore. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but,
I don't blame you.
and the same thing, I guess you could say, goes on in the cryptid world also. People get strange phone calls. Um, that happens too. And I was communicating with a guy, and we were talking about certain locations, and he had sent me coordinates and what have you. And I went back to my phone. I'm looking at it. I'm like, shit, all that information was gone. And I even had stuff like on my Google Drive that was gone. I thought, well, maybe I just freaking erased it. So I called him up and, hey, can you give me this information again? He goes, yeah. He calls me up and says, dude, all that's gone. So, whatever happened to all that
Wow.
information, was gone on both ends. So, that's just the way it
Wow.
is. Yeah. So now I keep everything on portable drives that aren't like connected to Wi-Fi or anything like that. So
Yeah.
that's what I do. Yeah. So,
Yeah. That's smart.
uh, so if you had to pick one, like whether it was UFO, cryptids, or paranormal, which one would you like focus on?
I like to focus on the cryptid thing. However, I am very well versed more in the paranormal stuff because I've spent more than 20 years researching the paranormal versus around 10 for like cryptids.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm a cryptid guy, even though I've had a lot more experience with the paranormal. I just love going out into the woods and out into the nature. So that fits me perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, do you want to talk about your areas that you go researching? I mean, you don't have to. You certainly don't have
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, there's a location that I am researching right now that isn't very far from where I live right now. And we've had some really strange stuff happen there. It's a mix of paranormal and cryptid type stuff. So it's a very interesting location. So I like to research with multiple different ways of researching. So I'll bring my paranormal stuff into the cryptid field, and I'll bring my cryptid stuff into the paranormal field. And so any tools that I use are interchangeable between one versus the other.
Right.
So it comes in handy when researching this location because um, I had another researcher with me there one night, and we were out there and we decided, okay, we're gonna park our car down the road and we're gonna walk up so that nobody knows that we're here, and we're gonna take the back way in, and we're going all the way up and around. There's this abandoned cabin in these woods. and we're going to set up shop there so we can have something inside. We're kind of inside. There's no doors, no windows or anything like that, but there's kind of a roof, a half a roof at least. We're going to go in there. We're going to set up all of our stuff in there, and that's going to be like our base. And then we can, move out from there if we need to. Well, we finally get up there. It's a pretty long hike in. It's about a 45-minute hike to this cabin. So we get out to this cabin and we set all of our stuff up, and we get all of our stuff out. We start setting recorders around and in this cabin. We start putting we start setting up an LDR and things like that. And we just decided, well, let's chill out in this cabin here. Let's, play around a little bit with the paranormal, see if we can start anything up, and then we'll kind of move out into the woods from there. Because this cabin was supposedly haunted. And we're sitting in this cabin, and all of a sudden we start hearing something moving around outside the cabin. We're like, okay, it's getting closer. So I'm like, I don't want to get up and go around and check through past this doorway. I want to wait and see how close it gets. And so we're sitting there. Finally, the other investigator just gets up and walks over there. And then all the noise on the outside just stops. And so we're sitting there for probably a good 20 minutes. And finally, we're like, yeah, let's start doing our normal thing. We were not getting anything, and we're not going to move locations. We start just conversing, talking, playing around, doing stuff to try to attract attention. And so the other investigator gets up and he's like, I'm going to dance with the ghost. And so I'm like recording him dancing, and, we're having a good time. And he's like, da, 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 pretend to dance. He's like inviting whatever ghosts are around to come dance with him just to see what happens. And finally he sits down. And as we're sitting there, all of a sudden this black, I thought it was because see, the way we had our light set up, we had one of our lights set up to this one back doorway that wasn't around any kind of opening. It was just brush. And I wanted it set up right there because I'm like, I can't see shadow to see if anything's getting ready to come in that door. It makes me feel uncomfortable. So I want a light shining towards that door that's got all this brush around it. So if anything moves the brush, I can see the brush moving. And so we got this little tiny light that's set up. And then we didn't want anything too bright because we didn't want anybody to know that we were in there. And so this little dim light shining just enough to where we can see. And inside, here comes this black, and it was like darker in the center, and it had these tendrils that went out all around it. And it was about this big altogether. And my first thought was, that's a shadow from a bug. And I'm looking for the bug in the light, and it's stationary for a minute. I'm not seeing a bug. I'm thinking a wallfly. Those things are, thicker in the center, and they got all these little legs that come off. So that's what I was thinking it was a shadow of that. And I'm looking, I see nothing. Well, this black object, shadowy object, moves out of the light, comes around, goes around the cabin, and then comes behind me. Well, we have no light source facing that direction. There's no way it could have been a shadow from a bug still over here in this light. It would have stayed shining on that wall. It left the light and then continued on around me and went down and underneath the outside of the house, the building. And I'm like, you just saw that, right? And he goes, yeah, what was that? And I was like, I thought it was a shadow of a bug, but it went out the light and came around behind me, and it definitely not a shadow. Well, we're waiting. Finally, after that, we just decided to sit in the cabin, see if we get any more paranormal stuff, because we weren't getting anything out there. We weren't getting any responses to any of the howls or anything we were doing or whatever. So we're like, we're just going to investigate in here because we got that black mass that came in. Well, nothing ends up happening again. I'm like, okay, let's just go ahead and go. It's 3:00 in the morning. I'm ready to get out of here. So we start packing up our stuff, and we're going down back out of the trail, pitch dark. Well, as we get further out, we're probably about, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes to being outside of the woods and back to the parking lot. And all of a sudden we hear this massive stick break. So we grab our night vision binoculars. We're looking, can't find anything. I'm watching his back. He's watching mine. And nothing else happens. So, okay, let's get moving again. Let's go ahead and get the rest of the way out of here. Nothing else is going to happen. Get out to the car, start loading our stuff in. And initially, I turned on my car. My car is a push button start. And as soon as you turn it on, the lights come on and everything comes on. And so I start the car, And then all of a sudden, as soon as I start the car, I hear all this. It sounded like, I don't even know what it sounded like, some sort of howl way off in the distance. And I'm like, wait, wait, wait. So I shut my car back off and I'm listening. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's getting closer. So I grab my recorder and I start walking back to where we came from, back to where the sound is now. And I'm walking, and the other investigator just decides he's going to chill out at the car. He's just going to stay right there. I take off walking towards the woods. Finally, he realizes I'm hearing something. He didn't have as good of hearing as me. Could hardly hear anything. I always had to tell him when I was hearing stuff. And so, so he finally realized I've heard something. So he starts coming behind me. Because when I first heard it, I'm like, shh, there's a noise. And he's like, what? And I'm like, there's a noise. Like, what? And I'm like, I'm not yelling any louder. I'm just going to walk. So I decided to take off. And then he realizes, okay, she must have heard something. So he takes off after me. And then it stops. I get it right when he meets up to me is exactly when it stops. It stops making all the noise. I'm like, okay. I waited. Decided it was done. Went back to the car. Gonna leave. Turn on my car again. This time, no headlights. I'm like, what? So I'm like, okay. I'm thinking, okay, flipping it on, flipping the auto on and off, trying. Finally, I try the high beam. The high beam comes on. I'm like, okay, where's my low beam? Both my low beams are out. So I decided to pop the hood. I wanted to check the wires. Maybe somebody messed with the car while we were up there. So I get out the car, I pop the hood, I'm checking the wires, making sure everything's connected. And I'm like, wait a minute. I had just turned my car on and the lights came on. Nobody's messed with the car since we walked to the middle of the parking lot and back again. We weren't even like maybe 50 feet from the car. We weren't very far at all. So I'm like, no, somebody's definitely not messing with us. But I checked the wires anyways. Everything looked good. Finally, I shut the hood and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I guess we're going to have to get back with the high beams. That's all we got. So I flipped the high beams back on. Nothing. No high beams now. I'm like, okay, something weird is going on. Something really strange is going on. So I'm like, I don't know what to do. The other investigator's like, we got to get out of here. We got to go. You don't know what's going to happen next. And I'm like, we can't go. We have no headlights. So I'm like, there's a bridge over there that's just big enough for each tires. It's a bridge. There's 2 boards on each side. You got to get your tires right on that to get over this. I'm not going to try that with no headlights. So I'm like, no, we're not going anywhere yet. We're going to stay here and figure out what's going on with these headlights. So I'm like, okay, I'm trying everything. Finally, I turn the car off, turn it back on again. My high beams come on. I switch it to low beams. Low beams are still out. Decide I'm going to head home with my high beams. Finally get back to the house. We carry everything in. I go where I go. He goes where he goes. And then the next day I go out. I'm like, I'm going to check these bulbs. I want to see what's wrong with these bulbs. Maybe they're loose. Maybe something I couldn't see at night. I checked the bulbs. The bulbs had blown so hard, it nearly blew the bulb out of its socket. They were completely blue. And the one light had blown so hard, it was loose inside the socket. And I'm thinking, how did both of my low beam lights blow at the same time? Something weird happened. And then my high beams blew and then came back. So I was like, maybe there's something wrong with the wiring. Maybe it was like a short and it fritzed out, and that's what caused it to blow so hard. So I replaced the bulbs, and that's been probably about 1.5 years now. And the bulbs still work just fine. So it wasn't a bad connection or anything, any kind of wiring issue. So something weird happened that night. There was a lot going on, a lot of things that could have been going on, but it was just like these weird little things that just kept happening all night long. But that place is known for that. Some of the reports that come out of there are where people get hit with things. And there was a couple that went in there one night and stayed in the same broken down cabin. And they were in their tent. They set the tent up inside. And when they were in their tent, something came inside and ransacked the whole place. They said it sounded like a deer. And this report comes from Dusty Ruth. So they said it was like a deer had been just going in there and just causing havoc. And then when they got out of their tent, it was like something just went through and unzipped all their bags and pulled everything out like they were looking for something. And they gathered their stuff up and got out of there in the middle of the night super duper fast. So other reports are people getting hit in the head with things. So much so that Dusty Ruth also investigates the same location, which we didn't know that until he showed us his location. I'm like, oh, this is our location too. So he was talking about, now he wears a helmet there because people get hit in the head so much. He doesn't want to get hit in the head. He's on medicine where he can't get an open wound. So he actually wears a helmet while he's in there to avoid any kind of head injury while he's there. Because there's been incidences where people have left there with head injuries by getting hit in the head with rocks. But my experience there, my best experience there was that one I just told you about, where it was just like this clutter mess of just these different things going on. Like you could blame the lights going out on some sort of potential alien activity, and then the black mass could have been paranormal, and the stick breaking could have been Bigfoot. It was just like all these different things that were happening in one location. So it's a really cool location, and I'm looking forward, honestly, to taking another investigator in there, and we're going to do an all-nighter again. So that's something we got coming up in a couple weeks.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like a great location.
Yeah.
It always fascinates me because I've heard of stuff happen like that. With vehicles or any kind of electronics. But I think it's always fascinating to hear when vehicles don't work. Because we've been out, like I said, once again in Walter's area. Um, we had 16 packs of batteries. We had just bought them at the store. We went there, and he had a night vision that it ran on the double A's or triple A's, whatever they were. But there were both 16 packs. We went through all those batteries, and not a one worked. Right, and it took something like 4 or 6 batteries, maybe even 8, if I'm thinking about it correctly. None of those batteries worked. When we got back to the house, we're like, dude, we gotta retry. Maybe it was just your night vision was just messed up or whatever. We put those batteries in, they all worked fine when we got,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and yeah, so that's pretty crazy. And I like what you said about like, when you go out and you do, your cryptid research, you also incorporate the paranormal stuff and vice versa. I don't have any paranormal, equipment other than my camera and my voice recorder, right? But I think that a lot of paranormal activity does happen, and it gets confused or mixed in with Bigfoot. I think whether it's footsteps or even like the voices that people hear in the woods, I think a lot of that could be paranormal, but people just say, "Oh, well, that's Bigfoot activity." Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think, and that's why I think the way I research is beneficial, because I think there's a lot of um, misidentified things
Right.
that people report. You go out in the woods and you hear a howl. I mean, it might not be a Bigfoot. What if it's a screaming woman out there in the woods,
Right.
of a ghost? But I think the beneficial part of my, I guess you could say, abilities, the fact that I'm sensitive, is I can kind of feel the difference. I can feel, okay, this feels more lifelike, this feels more flesh and blood, versus this feels more um chaotic and like spectral. So that, I think that's where my sensitivities come in handy. But I think there's a lot of misidentified or misunderstood experiences where people try to blame it on one thing or the other, and it might not be that.
Right.
So I think that you're right. But the location of the first experience that I told you about, the Bigfoot on the mountain, that was on the Travel Channel. Before we actually investigated there that night, we did a spirit box session up on the same cliff that we left that other night. So we were up there prior. We did a scout first during the day, and while we were up there, I was like, "Well, let's ask the spirits. Let's see what the spirits have to say." So I broke out my SB7, which is a spirit box, and we asked the spirit box, you know, what are we looking for here? And it said Bigfoot. And then we were like, wow, this is great. This is, real responses. And I was like, where can we find Bigfoot? And it said in the east.
Hmm.
Well, when we were out of that mountainside area, it was more towards the east side of the mountain we were hearing all those calls. So it kind of added validation to that first scouting experience that we had with the spirit box. So we heard all those calls coming from the east side. So it was really cool.
Yeah, see, yeah, that's pretty cool. I never thought about taking the spirit box out there. uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I've always like try to implement uh, tangible items. I guess you could say like like those Kim lights. I use
Mm,
those light a lot. I'll hang them up and I'll leave my voice recorders around there, which we've got pretty good results off of that. We've gotten growls and footsteps and branches snapping. Um, so I think that they do that. And my next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna buy some the little jingle bells that you hold in your hand, with the little
um,
jingle bells. Yeah, and I'm gonna set them up next to my chem lights, and maybe we'll hear something off of that.
that's smart. I actually have a set of those myself. And I went one night when I went to collect them, something big stomped in the woods when I was collecting it off the tree. And I was like, oh, no, no, no. Get it and go. It's too close.
Yeah, so I know you said you're going out in a couple of weeks. Do you do any paranormal investigations or research?
Yeah, I do. When it's summertime, I like to try to do as much Bigfoot stuff as I can because it's more easy for me to
Mhm.
be out there. It's hard for me to be in the cold. I have a health condition called Raynaud's, so I get cold really, really easy, and my fingers lose circulation. So I try to do as much Bigfoot research as I can in the summer. And then in the winter time, I'll still do a bunch of Bigfoot research, but there's a lot more prep involved.
Mhm.
So I try to devote my winter and early spring time to paranormal, and then my later spring, summer, and fall time to Bigfoot.
Okay. And where you're at are they there year round?
Yeah, we do get reports of like footprints in the snow and stuff,
Mhm.
but it's so hard to investigate those types of things because by the time you get there, the prints are already gone because our weather fluctuates so badly that a lot of times you either have more snowfall or your prints have already melted. So, we do have research. We do research on Bigfoot in the wintertime, but a lot of our evidence with the footprints and stuff is collected via the client because they have to go out there and get pictures and measurements and everything before we can even get there. Because by the time we get there, usually our prints are no longer usable or even measurable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things I like about where we're at. It doesn't get extremely cold. So we've only had a couple of years, really within the last 5 or 6 years, when it got like below freezing. But
Yeah.
so it doesn't get terribly cold here. So we're still able to go out in the wintertime if we don't mind being cold. Which I'm not a cold weather person at all. So even 32 degrees for me is cold. you know.
That's freezing to me.
Yeah. And but the summertime, I try not to go out if I don't have to. Just because it's so hot here in Texas, and the
Yeah.
mosquitoes, the ticks are freaking everywhere. And
Yeah.
dude, you can literally wind up with thousands of mosquito bites if you're not careful. And that's when
Yeah,
I
and
get.
I don't really like to use like insect repellent. There's too much of a smell. I try to keep my scent very neutral when I'm going to investigate Bigfoot. So if there's a lot of ticks and mosquitoes and stuff, I'm going to get bit, and I'm probably going to end up with a couple on me because I just don't use those repellents because of the smell. I don't want to be. I want to be as least noticeable to Bigfoot as possible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Not. Yeah. I agree with you on that. I try not to put on like any cologne or um, even too much deodorant. Really, to be honest with you,
Mhm. Yeah,
uh, So I try to remain as neutral as I can too. Um,
yeah.
I was going to ask you this question: as far as when you go out and you research, the cryptids or Bigfoot, do you think being a female is an advantage or a disadvantage, or do you think it doesn't matter?
Honestly, I think it kind of depends on a lot of things. So I think that it's useful in the fact that we can attract them depending on the times. But also, I think that when you attract something because you have those feminine smells, it can also create aggression.
Yeah.
So I think that there's benefits and consequences. But I think if you want to have a more up close and personal experience with a Bigfoot, you should probably take a woman
Yeah.
because I think they can offer that. I think you get a lot more aggression when there's a lot more men present than women.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense too. I think the most aggressive stuff we've ever had, even though there was a woman there, there was more men there than there was, Uh, I think every time I've always gone, there's always been like at least one woman with us. But yeah, I think the times that we've been that had the aggressive encounters, there's always been men there. So yeah. And I don't go with a big group anyway, maybe 4 or 5 people at the most.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of my maximum too. I feel comfortable in a bigger group, but you don't tend to get as many close encounters with a big group.
Well, cool, man. Well, this hour's gone by really quick. Even though we started off late, it's already coming up on the hour. Do you have any kind of contact information or any pages or websites you want to give out to the people?
Yeah, so I have a blog which I haven't gotten to for a while, but I have a lot of stuff I want to put up there, a lot of videos, paranormal videos from my own house. It's a blog. It's called Uncharted Paranormal Studies. It started as a group. Now it's a blog for my own personal experiences, the things that I can share.
Mhm.
Problem was wasn't able to share as much as I thought I was going to when I started this page because a lot of clients don't want their information out there. So it became a more personal blog about my personal experiences. So that's getting ready to get revamped and a lot of stuff posted there. It's called Uncharted Studies. And then I have also the Fold Mysteries, and that's on Facebook as well as thefoldmysteries.com. So the Fold Mysteries is a paranormal is an all over, all encompassing research and exploration group. So that's getting revamped. Everything was on a hiatus temporarily because I was moving. So I'm almost settled in. So my online store is going to open back up soon. Uh, and there's also a forum on thefoldmysteries.com that you can get on there and ask questions and talk to people about paranormal or Bigfoot or alien stuff. So it's kind of a cool website, even if you're not into one subject or the other. There's something on there for everybody.
Well, I don't know if you're a member of the Beyond the Woodline fan page. If not, join it and feel free to share all your stuff there. And yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, cool. Well, cool, Miss Gwendolyn. Thank you for joining the show. And
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
like I said, man, this hour went by quick. So I got a bunch of questions here that I've been writing down as you've been talking, but we'll get to some other time. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add or anything you want to say to the folks? You got any words of wisdom for people wanting to get involved in this field?
Yeah, absolutely. Start small. If you want to jump into this field, anything with the weird or mysterious, start small. Do some book research first. Understand what you're getting into, and bring a friend. You don't ever want to do anything alone, because even if nothing paranormal happens to you, it's a safety issue. So you always want to have one person at least to be able to get help if needed. So don't do it by yourself and start small.
Cool. Cool. Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are good words. Even though I don't always, listen to my own rules. You know,
That's true.
yeah, it's hard sometimes, but yeah, yeah, that's good. Well, like I said, thanks a lot for joining, doing the show. I appreciate it a lot. You know, the people in the chat, thanks a lot. You guys are always great with all your comments and stuff and questions, so I appreciate that. And I will see you guys tomorrow night. I actually have a show tomorrow night too, so um, it's okay, Nick. Thank you for joining. We appreciate it. You disappeared for a bit. But yeah, thanks a lot, Gwen. And if you have any questions or like I said, you want me to share anything, just pass them to me and I'll share them.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hold on real quick.